even with all of my like natural childbirth research and listening to podcasts and just all these things, never really thought anything about that. So that was really big for me and what's important for me in this next upcoming birth, because I think now knowing that, whether there is that gap where there's a head and she's ready, but she isn't, like me as the mom is not saying that I feel pushy at all. And so I would have maybe even directed us that way without realizing it's okay to take a break. You don't have to do it just because the baby's ready.
Welcome. This is a Journey to Birth podcast coaching session. I'm Tristin, the creator of the Natural Birth Compass online childbirth education program. And on this series, you will hear me help Starre, one of our Natural Birth Compass program students, preparing for her second birth after unexpected events required some changes in her first birth. A couple of notes before we jump in. This is my fourth coaching call with Starre. In this call, Starre is just beginning her third trimester, and she will share how her childbirth education is helping her prepare for the different stages of birth in a different way than she felt she experienced in her first birth, especially in regard to the natural flow of the birth cycle in an unmedicated birth. We will also catch up on how her breathwork practice has been going as she explores ways to reduce tension and the physical constraints in her core that may have influenced her baby's positioning and slowed her dilation and contraction buildup. Well, that wraps up my intro details for this session. If you missed any of our previous coaching calls, I strongly recommend that you go back and listen to those in order before listening to this episode. Now, if you're ready, I hope you enjoy sitting in on this call as we help Starre on her journey to birth. Hi, Starre. Welcome back for call number 4.
Hi, Tristin. It's good to be back.
Good to see you today. So last time I know we covered a whole lot of stuff and you had a whole lot of homework.
Yes.
To work on. And then I noticed also that you have actually powered through quite a few of the modules in the course as well.
Yes.
So I think we actually have a lot to talk about
today.
I've
really been enjoying modules 3 and 4.
Great. Oh, I'm happy to hear that.
So yeah, I think it probably feels really tactical to me. So I'm like, oh, this is fun. Let's go to the next one.
Yeah, I know. Number 2 is feeling very conceptual, which it is.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how people, are meant to feel, because it is a very conceptual part of the course that you just have to go through in order for parts 3 and 4 to be able to be more solid for you when you get into that part.
Yeah.
Okay, so module 3 is the birth cycle.
Yeah.
So any questions from how that looks?
I don't think questions. It was mostly just really interesting to me. I really liked the concept of the 4th stage of labor. I loved that. And I think the part that I liked learning about so much was talking about transition. Because for me, when I would look back to my birth with my daughter, it wasn't clear to me when transition happened and what that was like. And I would hear other people talk about it and they would like know about transition and like, oh, I was obviously in transition. And now looking back on my birth, I do know when it happened. It's funny though, because while it was the time in my labor, or one of the times in my labor where I did kind of think, oh my gosh, I can't do this, which you hear is really normal, it also was the part of my labor where I felt like the actual laboring up until pushing, where I felt like I had figured it out the most. Like I felt like I figured out how to really dig deep and just allow my body to do what it needed to do. And so I, in a weird way, like enjoyed that part of my labor because I just felt like everything was working and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. So I loved hearing about that just because I think there's been a lot of questions in my mind about like, do I know when that was? What was it like? And will it be different? And then also, I think the other thing that was huge for me, and I talked to you about this, I think in that short questionnaire before we started, about how being in control of, I don't like saying in control, but like directing when pushing happens with this baby is a big deal to me, because that's something that I felt like just never happened in my first birth. It was oh, I see a head. So now just put mom on the table and she's ready. And even with all of my like natural childbirth research and listening to podcasts and just all these things, never really thought anything about that. And I had shared with you, I never felt the urge to push. I pushed because people were telling me to push. And one thing that it covered was how there can be like a really long break, and a lot of moms will even like take a little bit of time to rest. So that was really big for me and what's important for me in this next upcoming birth, because I think now knowing that whether there is that gap where there's a head and she's ready, but she isn't like, me as the mom is not saying that I feel pushy at all, I think I probably would have been confused and like, well, if my midwife in the same scenario saw a head, I'd be like, oh, well, it's time to push, I guess. And so I would have maybe even directed us that way without realizing it's okay to take a break. You don't have to do it just because the baby's right there. So that was probably the biggest thing that I took away, just learning about the different stages. And I liked how the cycle plays into all of it, and realizing, because I like to be in the active part of things and stay in the active part of things. So just realizing that recharging portion is really important, and you get to go back to the active. It's okay. You actually need the whole cycle to make it work. So that's, I guess, a summary of what I got out of module 3.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think you kind of covered everything. That's interesting to hear you reflect back on your transition, because when I think back to you telling your birth story, I could have pinpointed exactly when you were in transition just from the way that you describe how you were in the different parts of your labor. So for me, it's very clear that transition was happening when you and your midwife were in the shower in the bathroom there at the hospital. I think the part where you were able to feel like you could let that part take over, it was not so much because you were in transition, but because in part because the way that the stages work, but I think also because you really had found that space where you felt comfortable and like you could just let things go.
Yeah.
The two of you were in there. It was a safe space. You knew that things were going to happen. Now you were going to progress at this point. Where before that, when you'd been kind of stalled out for a long time, there was probably a lot of question. The plan was changing. Things weren't going how it was laid out in the books. So what do you do? And then you had already transferred to the hospital. You knew that things were going to go forward one way or another at this point. And then you were there with your midwife. So you had that guidance and that safety, and you could just let go and finally let things happen. I think the letting go for you is one of the keys to just allowing your body to do what it needs to do when you're in the earlier parts of labor, the early and active labor, where you have to kind of take your brain out of it and just let the body go. So yeah, the transition part, you might be aware of it in this second labor.
Yeah.
Maybe, just depending on where your mental state is, but you'll definitely pinpoint where it was after the birth this time, whereas last time you were kind of questioning where it happened. Did it happen?
Yeah.
You'll be more aware of it the second time around. I had the same thing in my first labor. I didn't notice. I think I just wasn't aware enough of what transition was and how it played into things. But my second labor, I definitely can tell you exactly where transition was. I was much more aware of it, and then having gone through the experience the first time, and just having a little better education the second time. So you'll probably notice it more in the second one, at least afterwards, when you reflect back on that birth. And then I just want to point out, just a little bit about the cycle and the fourth stage, for just in case we have people listening who have no idea what we're talking about, because generally labor is talked about in 3 stages, but in the Natural Birth Compass program, we bring in a fourth stage because there's this really vital component that isn't necessarily considered a stage. It's kind of bundled in, but everything that I've been able to understand about life and birth is based on the framework of this cycle that recurs for us everywhere all the time. Now, you're really familiar with this cycle because you've gone through the course, and everything in the course is built up on this cycle. But for people who aren't familiar with it, I'll do a quick overview. So we have a bunch of different cycles that occur in our lives all the time in all different lengths of time, and some of them are big cycles, some of them are small cycles. So one that's really easy to understand is to think of the yearly cycle with the 4 seasons. And they always happen in the same order. So we have spring, summer, winter, fall, always in that same order. And then we have the daily 24-hour cycle that's going to be the sunrise and then daytime, and then we have sunset, and then we go into nighttime. Again, it's always in that same order, very predictable, very expected. In birth, we also have these cycles, but what we've commonly taught in childbirth education is 3 stages. The first being active labor, the second being the pushing stage, and the third being the expulsion of the placenta. However, what I've compiled from research that I've done and really simply just observing what happens in birth, in many ways, we actually do have these 4 stages of birth. The first being active labor, the second still being the pushing and the birth stage. But the third now becomes this mother-baby bonding time, the time before the placenta is ready to be birthed. And then the 4th stage then still becomes that birthing of the placenta. So I find this really important to include because these cycles have been observed and followed in many ancient civilizations throughout human history. And it seems like this cycle of birth, this cycle that is something that exists, that's so foundational to life, something that's as primal in life as birth, that when I reflect on what the different parts of this cycle, these 4 different parts, what they have to offer, it suddenly made sense that mother-baby bonding was, of course, part of that cycle, and it had to be the 3rd stage. And it suddenly became clear to me just how important it is to experience this 3rd stage of birth for the cycle to properly close up the whole birth cycle. So let me just explain that a little bit more. So to run through the cycle quickly, for those who aren't familiar with what we teach in the Natural Birth Compass program and the birth cycles that we teach there, and now I'm not going to be able to do this complete justice here because it's a pretty deep topic and we do devote a whole portion of the course to it, but I'll do the best that I can to summarize it. So active labor resonates with spring. This is when everything starts to come alive and is buzzing with early activity. This is when everything is preparing to make an appearance into the world and just starting. So in birth, it's the softening and the dilation of the cervix and all the work going on inside the body that we can't see on the surface, except, of course, on the laboring person's face at certain parts of labor. But we can't see that cervical change with our eyes. We can't see the baby moving into the birth canal with our naked eye either, much like we can't actually see seeds starting to sprout when they're still under the ground. We can't see all of the different activity of the soil organisms as that soil starts to warm up and that activity starts to increase. But it's happening. It's just concealed away until we get to that next stage, the summer, or in birth, the pushing stage. So at that point, of course, the baby's head is sitting right there on the cervix. Everything is open. The cervix is fully dilated and everything's expanded outward. And that baby is ready to come into the world. Much like how summer feels to us. It feels wide open and expansive, and the days are just long and open, and the beauty of all the flowers being fully open and all of the garden, everything starting to come into full bloom and fruition. So the 2nd stage of birth, this is the actual birth of the baby. And then we have the arrival of fall and all of the produce and the great fruit and veggies that have ripened over the summer, everything that's going to be harvested and brought in from the field to be prepared and stored. It's the season of focusing on nourishment. And as the days shorten, the fall helps to draw us back in from that open, wide open bliss of summer to get us ready to go into that restore and recharge, that hibernation stage of winter, much like a new mother after being expanded and fully open and allowing her baby into the world, then wants to draw that newborn back to her that she's been connected to for all of these 9 months leading up to this moment. She wants to draw that newborn to her chest to be nourished, where her newborn is going to bring in her smell and her taste as they start their life in this whole new world in this whole new way. So the thing with summer is that it has to end. It's too big and it's too open to be continuous. It would be as if we're in the noontime part of our day constantly, but we can't do that. We have to sleep in order to stay healthy and even for our life to go on day after day. And the same is true of birth. After you've been so open in order to birth your baby into the world, you have to bring that cycle back inward again. And many moms will feel that instinctually as the urge to bring their baby back into their chest. And after the two, mother and baby, they bond and they recharge in that fall time energy, they move then into the winter season, to that quiet hibernation space where everything is slow and everything turns inward, where the new mother can recharge her energy and prepare to birth her baby's placenta as we move into that fourth stage of labor. So without this vital third stage of bonding, both the mother and the newborn, they miss out on that nourishing piece, and the mother's going to have a more difficult time recharging for birthing the placenta, in which case sometimes we even see Pitocin used to help speed this portion of the birth cycle along. And we now know, of course, from research that's been done that this bonding period is important for the immune system of the baby, for the digestive system of the baby to develop, for the hormone balance of both mom and baby. And many hospitals now, and of course, out-of-hospital midwives have always supported this, but even many hospitals now understand that this phase of birth is vitally important to the recovery and the rebuilding of mom and baby after that birth. So that's a very quick overview of the 4 stages of birth that actually, as I said, we give a whole class in our full course to just understanding the 4 cycles, because there's a lot of complexity and simplicity both at the same time in how those cycles work and how it gives you a completely new perspective on the cycle of birth and understanding where you are in that cycle and how having that connection to these natural cycles that happen around you all the time can give you some insight into how to help support those different stages of birth most efficiently for both you and your birth partner.
Yeah, I loved it because that is, I think, natural. Like, that's the natural progression. It really is. Like, the baby comes out and you want that baby up with you. It's not that the next step is to birth your placenta. That can happen even hours later for some people. In my experience, it was pretty immediate. But my daughter had started nursing before her placenta was born. So it is very true to my experience with her birth. So
yeah, and it will be interesting how it will look and feel to you this time around with this knowledge and perspective that you're developing. Hi, it's Tristin here, and I wanted to jump in for a quick minute to let you know about a new resource that I've developed for you. 2020 has brought a lot of uncertainty into pregnancy and birth, and I know that it might have you thinking about whether or not you still want to birth in the hospital with all of the increased risks of exposure to COVID-19. If you're considering moving your birth from a hospital to an out-of-hospital setting, I want to invite you to grab a free checklist of what you need to do to make your birth transition smooth and safe. In addition to the checklist, I've included a few bonus tips, such as the 3 steps you need to take to move from the hospital to a home birth or birth center birth, how to know if you need a childbirth class and how to choose the right one so you feel completely prepared. And I've packed the whole thing full of clickable links to the most helpful resources that you need right now so you don't have to waste your time on Google. Find this brand new resource at naturalbirthcompass.com/checklist. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to our show. So I'm curious, with you being in the East, how you felt when you were going through the portion of Module 3 that was about birth on time.
So surprisingly, I don't know if it's because I just love birth so much and have, I don't know, such a passion for it being as natural as possible because I think it's just so beautiful when it can be left that way. I have a really um, easy time with not like needing to interfere with the time of
Mm-hmm.
birth, if that makes sense. I thought it was very interesting how you explained um, like possibilities of going post date versus having a baby early and not recharging.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting because I the only part that I I did control, I was like, this baby can come. I was never like upset that I went past my due date. In fact, I expected it because I just know it's so normal that I wasn't going to anticipate an early baby. Um, and I don't think I mentioned this to you. I had actually been on bed rest from 32 weeks to 37 weeks
Oh.
because of, yeah, I don't think I mentioned that, because of contractions. Um, and I was at 32 weeks, 2 centimeters dilated, which I now know can be people's norm. But me and my midwife, because I was having such strong and actually like painful contractions at the frequency I was, she ultimately let me make the decision. She wanted me to go on like pretty much bed rest. And I put myself on a modified bed rest because I was like, I can't literally sit down for the next 5 weeks. But I did like hugely alter my work schedule, was not on my feet very much. And as soon as 37 weeks hit, I was like off and running. And so a lot of people, because that happened, thought I was going to be really frustrated when I was still pregnant after 40 weeks. But I was totally okay with it. The part that I was in control of was I was like, well, if this baby isn't here, I get to do, like, I'm going to continue doing what I would normally do. I'm not sitting around and waiting for her. And so I was a manager at the time. And I, so I scheduled my maternity leave to start um, at 39 and 5 days. And I started my maternity leave. The baby didn't come like that day. And I was like, I'm coming back to work. This is stupid. um, so I knew like it'd be good to give myself a few days to relax and to rest and get ready for this. But I was like, I'm wasting all this productive time. Like I could be using my time off when my baby's here instead of using it now because I did go back to work when my daughter was 12 weeks old. And so I actually took myself off of maternity leave and I went back to work for 2 days. Um, so it's funny because then my labor started like 24 hours after I like officially like my boss was like, you have to leave. You're not allowed to come back. Um, so it's funny that it was the first full day where I just stayed at home and I didn't do anything. That late in the afternoon was when my labor decided to sort of start, as you know. So I thought that was very interesting because I'm like, oh my gosh, how much of this, like, I definitely lacked self care in that, well, probably my whole pregnancy because I'm not the type of person to slow down and take care of myself at all. But especially in the end when my body was trying to get ready to run a marathon.
Yes.
So while I allowed the baby to come when she wanted to come in my mind, I really kind of control it by not letting it get in the way of my life.
Yeah, and it's a hard line, that's a hard thing to balance
Yeah.
of not letting it completely control everything or not being completely hands off just because you're at the end of the pregnancy, but also doing not overdoing things
Yeah.
so that you're taking
Yeah.
away from what your labor needs to be able to
Yeah.
progress. So things that we're working on this time, we'll see if it plays out differently.
Yeah. And I am trying to, I don't even want to say trying, I'm doing a lot better at just finding time for myself. Like I have been, even since actually before our last session, have been like taking baths a couple times a week, which for me is really abnormal. I am one of those people that would think like, well, it'd be nice to take a bath, but who has time for that? There's so many other things to do. And I've been doing more yoga, so I've been a lot more comfortable. But all those things are productive time to take away from my day, is how I think about it. But I'm teaching myself to realize that, especially right now, I'm in a season where my body needs me to really pay attention to it, but that those things can be productive because I have to take care of myself. So I'm trying to be a little bit more in tune with what my body needs and how I can almost pamper it a little bit and take care of it while it's doing so much work. So I'm interested to see how that plays out in the end when this baby comes, because I suppose I say that I'm okay with it coming whenever, but I keep telling everyone like, oh, this baby is coming late because the last one came late. So I'm totally planning on her coming after her due date. But we'll see, because I live a very different lifestyle as a stay-at-home mom. I'm older. Obviously, I have a lot more insight just getting to do this experience with you. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that impacts when the baby comes.
It will be. It will be really interesting. And I'm really glad that you're giving yourself permission to take care of yourself. I expect it's going to make this labor a very different experience for you. Having kind of had a similar experience, just being really busy when I was pregnant with my first,
Yeah.
trying to wrap up a lot of things and not having been rested before that labor.
Mm-hmm.
And comparing that to my second labor, where I very intentionally took time off before my second came, and how different that labor was. Just being able to be rested going into it, it was like night and day.
Interesting. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. Hopefully you'll find that having those reserves with this labor is going to mean that your early and active labor is much more efficient than last time.
Yeah.
and sticks to a more regular pattern.
Yeah. And I feel like I have so much more time and knowledge to invest in my diet. And I've always been a pretty health conscious person, but I literally worked 50 hours a week up until after my due date. And so during my pregnancy, there was a lot of picking up food on the way home. And while we weren't, swing through a drive-through people, it's not the same. We would maybe get Thai food that had a bunch of vegetables and stuff in it. But when you're eating that way all the time and you're not carefully kind of picking out, fats and proteins and those types of things, you're not focusing as much on, the in-depth nutrition. In my mind, I was like, well, at least there's a vegetable in this meal. So I think that that's going to play into it way differently, even just in this pregnancy, like waking up and I eat like eggs and avocado for breakfast, like pretty much every morning. And just making those kinds of decisions, because when I was waking up at 5 a.m. and coming home at 6 or 7, it just, that wasn't happening.
Yeah, the health of the food is definitely a huge impact. I will not argue that one bit. I think also for you though, the other piece of the food part that's going to make a difference is the state of mind that you're in with your meals now. When you're intentionally cooking, you guys are probably sitting down to eat more, and you have more time to sit and assimilate your foods, where when you are living that 50-hour-a-week lifestyle and having to pick up food on the go or eating in the car on your way to work, your body just isn't in digest mode.
Yeah.
So you don't get as much out of it, even if you're eating the best foods. If you're not eating the best foods in a good environment, you're still reducing what you're actually doing for your body.
Yeah, that is a good point. And we really do have like 3 defined times where we sit down and have a meal together. Obviously, breakfast and lunch, it's me and my daughter. My husband leaves for work at 5:45 in the morning. But at breakfast, we sit at her little toddler table together, actually. We have breakfast together, and then we sit at the kitchen table for lunch. And we just sit there like I don't have my phone anywhere near me, and we just hang out and we eat our food. And then we eat as a family around the table at night. So yeah,
Yeah, those are fun times.
it is.
I miss those cute little days.
It is really fun.
It's fun now too. It's just different. Different
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Different fun. So I also wanted to check in a bit with you on how you're feeling about communication. You have not hit the communication portion of the course yet, but but you did do the birth plan course, that birth plan video that I put in there.
Yes.
You did watch that one. So that one talks about communication.
So communication wise, I'm feeling a lot more confident and comfortable. I think I mentioned at one point, I just have a hard time, like I'll know exactly what I want or what I think I need and not expressing that. So I feel, I don't know, very empowered, I guess, is probably the easiest word to describe like how I feel going into the communication this time around with my midwife, with my husband. In theory, those are the only two people I'll be communicating with. So I almost feel like, okay, now it's a test. Like I'm having a hard time being patient to get there because I want to see if all of this information I'm absorbing and learning, if I'm going to in the middle of labor, remember how to use it all. But I'm practicing it like on a daily basis, asking my husband for things. It sounds really silly, but like I don't remember if I mentioned this in a different call with you, but like one night my husband had a lamp on his side of the bed, and I had asked him like, are you going to turn that off? Because he was like going to sleep, but his lamp was on. And I don't know, he probably didn't respond or anything. And then a couple minutes later, I said, will you please turn the lamp off? And he was like, I'm so proud of you for asking me. Like, he was like ecstatic because that's just, I don't know what it is. I think part of it is, I'm sure it has to do with my personality, but I'm like, I shouldn't have to ask anyone anything. They should just know. And so, like, if I make a comment about the lamp being on, you should just automatically turn the lamp off. And he was like so proud of me for saying, will you please turn the lamp off? And so it sounds really, again, silly, but right now, it's just little things in life that I have to practice. And instead of like saying like, oh, I'm so thirsty, saying like, will you go get me a glass of water? And it's like, as a, almost 29-year-old, you would think that you could do those things, but it just is something that has always been hard for me. I want everyone to read my mind. So I've been practicing it a lot, and it's shocking how much it's also just helping my everyday life.
I think it's probably shocking how many people struggle with very similar types of problems with communication. Right?
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest struggles that we face as humans.
Yeah.
Because we're so complex.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, for you doing this work on yourself, and then now you're aware of how we're all different types, right?
Yeah.
It's not unknown. Like this isn't really new information. There's Myers-Briggs and there's Enneagram and all of these different ways to assess our personality types. We know that people tend to fall into one of any number of categories, depending on how small you want to break it.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of our struggle is learning how our particular type of identity that we carry with us and the traits and habits that we develop out of that, how do we use those to connect with other people in our environment in all kinds of ways. And I find this is one of the most important pieces for people to figure out before birth, because it becomes so important. It's kind of the keystone in birth unfolding the way that you would like to have it unfold, because you know very well that you can't control exactly what's going to happen in your birth, but you can still be in control of what's happening if you have those communication tools, so that you can still kind of direct where you want to go and what you want to have happening.
Yeah. I think going through the communication and thinking more about it, and it's giving me a voice that I don't think I had in my first labor. because it was, I think there's a lot of reasons why we can go into why, but I've even thought like, you know, man, I wish I could go back and do it again. And I would have even just taught, like for example, the doctor that delivered my baby, I hardly ever said a single word to him. Like it was a huge connection on my part. And I think so much of it was being a first time mom and just like not even just this whirlwind of like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening. This is what like labor feels like. And you have to kind of balance this being in your body and letting your body do that. But there is stuff happening around you and there's people around you need to communicate with. So yeah, as it pertains to birth plans specifically, I have thought a lot about, what would I have done differently now? Knowing what I know, how would I handle this? And, whatever happens with this birth, I feel so much more empowered to communicate my wants and needs and my confidence in myself and in my baby. Because, if everything is fine with you and your baby and you have that confidence, not allowing other people's fears, even if you feel confident, to kind of push you to make decisions.
Exactly. That's a big component of it, especially if you end up not at the birth center for any reason.
Right.
Then yeah, having that confidence is huge.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious, so you touched on this a little bit from your side of being able to ask questions to your husband in a more direct asking a question way rather than trying to work around the question.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about your ability to understand him and understand where he's coming from, being that north, more big concept type, more introspective type, kind of wanting to know all of the depths of everything. Do you feel like you're understanding him better, but also understanding how to help him to support you in this birth?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we have identified, and I believe is going to make a big difference, is for him, it's been all about understanding I'm allowed to ask the questions I have, because he was just so, I don't want to say scared, but he was hesitant to ask all these questions. And so since he didn't have the information, it halted him from some of the actions that he thought were important to both of us. But because he was unsure, I think for him, he needed to hear from me more that this is our experience, and that's really important to me, that he feels like it's our experience, that it's not just something I'm going through. We talk to our daughter all the time about how this baby is daddy's baby too, like in my tummy, because she's very possessive of the baby. And like, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a family activity. I mean, I'm not going to have my daughter there because that would totally stress me out. I'm not one of those, she's too young, and I'm not one of those moms that at this age I could do that. But I think in a way he needed a different kind of empowering, and it was almost the permission from me, his, control freak wife, that like, you are invited into this space and I actually need your help. And I want you to ask those questions, because asking those questions is going to help me communicate with you in the moment when I might not be able to articulate what your need be. So yes, I feel really excited about that portion too, because I think he feels more invited into this experience and empowered, but in a different way than I was needing to be empowered. So he needed to be more allowed into my space.
Yeah, and that's where the different personality types come into play. The different needs of each, the needs that you each have are going to be different, because your experience of the world is different and how you interact with people is different. If he was a South, he probably wouldn't have had any hesitation to asking questions and having all of those questions that he was keeping inside. He would have been expressing all of that, because that's part of their strength, is not having any issues with being vocal and communicating. That's one of their strengths, actually. Their natural strengths is communicating, where people in the North are not necessarily as good at the outward communication. They tend to be more inward processors. So going outside for information is not easy for them. So that's where he's going to have to kind of step up into that role at the time that it's needed.
Yeah.
And just, sometimes we have to step into the role of another compass direction, which is where, like, doing the work that you're doing, understanding where you're in different parts of that compass in different parts of the day and what that feels like.
Yeah.
And that you can do it, but sometimes in certain situations that are not comfortable, we have to push ourselves into those roles temporarily.
Yeah.
For certain situations. So that will be one that he will have to work on.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Tristin here. I can't believe how close we're getting to Starre's birth. I hope you are as eager as I am to hear how the aspects of her second birth go in comparison to her first, now that she knows about her birth compass and the traits of her dominant direction. If you would like to take the same assessment that Starre took to identify her natural birth compass strength, you can download a free copy of our assessment at naturalbirthcompass.com/assessment, so you can learn the exact steps you need to prepare for your upcoming birth with tips specifically designed for your type. And if you would like to be considered for a coaching call on this podcast, visit naturalbirthcompass.com/podcast, where you'll find a short questionnaire to apply to be on the show. I would love to explore your birth preparations right along with you. And now, back to Starre's session. And then anything else on module 3?
No, I feel like we've covered it.
Okay. And then 4 is pretty straightforward, a comfort technique. Anything specific in that one?
So far, not really. The main thought I've had is that we're going to have to rely on our communication in that. Like, there's one worksheet where you kind of go through, what are your expectations? What are their expectations? And how are you going to make that happen? And it's really hard for me to guess what I'm going to need, And so really my expectations are just that, he'll do whatever I need him to do. And I already know that he will, because it's so hard to know what you think you might need. And like the one birth that I was at prior to mine, like my sister required constant back pressure, like on her hips and stuff like that. And I didn't ever need that one time, but I know that this baby could be positioned different, or, so it could be totally different. So I found all of the information and the techniques very like informational. For me, I'm much more was thinking, okay, so it's when I get there, just being able to communicate, I want to try this. Because I did have those thoughts in my labor with my daughter, but I just didn't, it was like, whatever. I don't think I realized the value of different positions and what they can do and how people can support you. I was like, I'm fine, we're here, we can just stay here kind of a thing. So again, it's more just using that communication that we are learning and going to continue to learn to take those comfort techniques and adapt them in the moment for what we need.
For sure. You can't have the expectation of if you're going to need pressure on the hips or pressure on the back or somebody rubbing your shoulders. But I think for you, one of the expectations that I would encourage you, and I think this is not going to be a surprise for you or something that you're not already thinking of, because I know you're already doing it, but is that your expectation of you is that you are going to be able to ask for help when you need help.
Yeah.
In whatever form that asking takes, whether it's verbally asking or the two of you coming up with a way that you're going to be able to ask for help without it having to be vocal. If you're at a point in the labor where you can't say, hey, can you do this?
Yeah.
But having some kind of signal or cue that the two of you know means I need you to do something, come figure it out. And, expectation for him is that he's going to be available to read those cues and to be able to jump in and figure
Yeah.
out what it is that you need from him. So I think, things more in that area for the two of you, specifically the way that I see the two of you being able to work together in this labor
Yeah.
is where I would kind of take that lesson
Okay.
rather than it being kind of specific techniques that you're going to use, and you might kind of know things based on your last labor, like being in the shower, having the water,
Right.
that might be something that works great for you again. And it might not, it can
Right.
be completely different this next time around. So, that's stuff that you can't necessarily anticipate ahead of
Right.
time. But since we know that that worked for you last time, I mean, you have the same midwife, so she's probably going to remember that too.
Right.
But it's good for your husband to know, like, oh, the shower worked really well last time.
Right.
We need to remember that in case you're in transition and that's what you need, but you can't get into the mind space to think of it.
Right.
He has it. He knows that that's his role, is to anticipate what you need and get you into that shower and get that water on your back and help you out with that.
Yeah.
So making sure that you've kind of thought through those different things and gone over that with him. So he
Yeah.
has kind
That's
of a
good.
list of techniques that we can kind of anticipate might work better for you.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So anything else? Yeah, 4 is definitely more informational. And I think you
Yeah.
still have the last one, which is
Yeah.
acupressure. So that one obviously is just very straightforward acupressure techniques
Yeah.
to use. So then last time we were working on the breath work to help you work on that diaphragmatic breathing, the belly breathing, to help the pelvis and make sure there's enough space and room for baby to get good positioning. How has that been going?
So it's been going okay. I feel like it's really easy and natural to do it when I'm like laying on my back or my side. It feels so unnatural still when I'm standing up and moving around. One thing that I have become very aware of is I hold my breath a lot when I'm doing things, just whatever it might be. Like even if I was like bending down to pick up a phone charger to plug it into my phone and then sit down on the bed, I'll realize I had been just holding my breath that entire time. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling and I feel like I'm struggling. It almost feels like I'm not doing it right. Like it just does not feel natural at all. And it feels like I'm having to, this might sound weird, but it's easiest for me to do it if I am like almost making a really low grade moaning, like just the tiniest audible noise with the exhale. It helps me keep it like low because it reminds me of birth. And it's the only time I've really used that. And so that has helped me because I'll do that a couple times and it almost like helps me remember like where I'm supposed to be directing my breath. But it feels very unnatural in upright positions.
I think in part because you're East. So holding tension is more
Yeah.
common in people who are East. One, because you don't give yourself enough relaxation time.
Yeah.
So going into that relaxation state is really hard. It's hard for you to turn that sympathetic drive off and
Yeah.
allow a parasympathetic state to just let everything relax and really focus in on allowing that breath to come in fully. And then I think, your particular history of having been a gymnast
Right.
and having to be very conscientious of the strength of the center, the core, the trunk of your
Yeah.
body to prevent injury and to make sure you're sticking your landings and all the things that come with gymnastics in
Right.
particular. I'm sure that has patterned your brain to hold your body in a certain way.
Yeah.
And now it's time to start breaking that pattern down because it's not going forward. It's not going to serve you to
Yeah.
stay in that pattern. You're not doing that kind of activity anymore. And actually doing things like holding your breath when you're doing those kinds of activities, like bending over and picking something up, holding your breath when you do stuff like that actually puts you at more risk for injury than
Yeah.
to breathe properly while you're doing things like that, to like low back injuries and strains, things like that.
Which I mean totally makes sense. It's been interesting just realizing how much I do it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
standing at the kitchen counter instead of breathing while I'm chopping vegetables, it's like I hold my breath.
Yeah. Well, the good news is the first step to rewiring the brain is to notice when you're doing the thing you're not supposed to be doing. So
Yeah.
you completed the first step.
Yeah.
So have you tried looking in the mirror at your breath?
Yes. I
Okay.
have tried I have tried doing that. I feel like I have a hard time separating, like it almost feels painful because I feel like I'm like using my abs to make my abdomen like expand and contract rather than the breath. Like I just have such
Mm,
a hard time separating it feels like I'm engaging my exterior core muscles too much. Like that feeling, I don't know if you ever have done this, but like it reminds me of when I was a kid and I would pretend, like I would show my mom like a pretend pregnant belly. That's what it reminds me of. Like I'm stretching my stomach so much, but I'm like using the wrong, it feels like I'm using the wrong muscles. And maybe it's that I'm just using the right everything, but it's uncomfortable to do so. Like to really fill my abdomen with air that much. And then again, we didn't really talk about the exhale, but moving forward with the exhale, it just does not feel natural. And like I almost feel like I'm doing something wrong.
it sounds like you're doing it correctly.
Okay.
It should basically look like the pregnant belly that you do as a little kid,
Okay.
where your belly actually sticks out more than what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, I think some of it is just your psychology of I don't
Okay.
want to let my abdomen hang out like this because it
Yeah.
doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel right. You want to tighten it and control it.
Yeah.
Really, what you want to do is let it relax, but you are using muscles
Okay.
with your
Yeah.
exhale. You're using the diaphragm, and you are going to be using the other core muscles to some extent for the exhale, more or for the inhale, more so for the exhale. So, the exhale, we'll get into it a little bit today. I don't want you to focus a lot on the exhale
Okay.
because I want you to really be more focused on the inhale.
Okay.
But for the exhale, what you will be feeling is kind of the lower part of your abdomen, like belly button and lower. That part should kind of be coming up and in, like it's wrapping around your baby.
Okay.
But before I want you focusing on that too much, I want you to really get comfortable with how that inhale feels.
Okay.
Because for your type, that's a little bit more of a struggle. I think once we get past that part, you're going to be fine with the exhale because that's going to be more natural for you.
Yeah.
the,
Okay.
the inhale is what's going to be more unnatural for you because of your type.
Yeah. Okay. No, it makes sense. And I honestly think I do. I carry myself in this very like tense state all the time. Like if I fully relax, it's kind of funny, but if I fully relax, my pregnant stomach looks a lot different. Like all of a sudden, it looks like I'm carrying a lot lower, and I look like my stomach looks a lot bigger. And when I'm standing in what's my normal, natural, comfortable state, my whole belly kind of moves up and in a little bit, and it looks like I'm carrying my baby way different than if I truly relax all my muscles, which is just, it's so weird for me. It's like the athlete in me is like, no.
Exactly. It's that mentality that's getting in the way of allowing you to take a proper breath.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Which, and the athletic side of, I obviously haven't been involved in gymnastics for quite a while, but I've always been really athletic. So like I do long distance running and lots of core work and lifting, and like I love that. But it's kind of something that it's hard to not carry around all the time, you know.
it is. Yeah. And I hear some of the most difficult birth stories from people who are professional athletes or people who teach, they're like trainers or
Okay,
people who
yeah.
teach aerobics classes or CrossFit. people who
Yeah.
teach CrossFit, they tend to have really difficult labors. And I think that part of it, and I know some other people who work in this area, and people who are fitness trainers, but work specifically with pregnant and postpartum moms. What we see is that people who are overtraining and over tightening,
Uh-huh.
it's impacting the ability of their labor to just unfold because they're not letting go. They're
Right.
so tight that
Yeah.
the cervix doesn't dilate at a normal rate. The contractions have a hard time regulating just because they just
Interesting.
hold so much tension in that area.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's another thing besides just feeling more confident. The other thing for you that's going to make this labor play out a little bit differently is to get that area to relax more.
Yeah. Definitely. So that's a work in progress. But I will say it has been probably because when you're laying down, I'm not consciously holding my core in because I feel so comfortable doing it when I'm laying down, and laying down I feel like it's already becoming more of my norm. Like I've noticed when I'm laying in bed, like laying on my side, that's just how I'm naturally breathing. So it's good that I've got it in that way. It's unfortunately I don't really anticipate laboring laying down very much. So
Well, we have time.
yeah.
It takes a few weeks to rewire it to where you'll start finding that you're breathing correctly standing up more of the time.
Yeah.
So we have time. There's time
Yeah.
to get you there.
I'm glad this has probably been the biggest learning curve
Yeah.
of all of this.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on
No,
breath?
just
Okay.
that little check-in. So I'll keep working on what I'm working on.
Okay. And then last time we also talked about trying some more potassium-rich foods to see if that would help your sleep at all.
Yeah, and I think it has. It's funny because I think I mentioned that I typically don't like bananas very much.
Mm-hmm.
But I have really liked them in this pregnancy. And as I've been allowing myself to eat them even more, because I think from way back in my very rigid athletic days, where I had like a very strict diet, bananas are something that are just like pure sugar. In my mind, it was like, it's just sugar. Why would you eat it? Unless you just like got done with the workout or something. And so I've always kind of just had that in the back of my mind. It's not that, like, even if I maybe felt like I wanted one, I wouldn't eat it because to me, it's almost like the junk food of fruit. So I've been enjoying allowing myself to eat those more. But so I've been eating before bed actually a snack of like a banana and then some pistachios, which also have a fair amount of potassium in them. And I will say, I feel like some days it really helps, and then other days it doesn't. So it's probably maybe 3 days into it that I had the first night where I was like, man, this might actually be working. And then I've still had some rough nights, but then it was like kind of like every other night. Like I would sleep. There's been a couple nights where I've slept really well, like all the way through the night. It's a
Okay.
little bit of trial and error. Now, off the top of my head, I can't think of other things. I already was eating dates, some, which they have potassium. It's not super concentrated, as much as like a banana would be. But when that's a choice, like maybe nuts and dates or a snack in the middle of the afternoon over something else, I go ahead and choose that because I know that's going to help as well. I think overall it's helping. It seems like it's kind of like every other night now. I'm tossing and turning all night, but then I get like one really good night of sleep. So I'm going to keep doing it. Maybe it'll, over time help more.
Yeah. I think giving it a bit longer and seeing if we can get more nights
Yeah.
than that.
I will say that there was one night specifically, probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 days, because it's been almost a week and a half since we last chatted.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the phone with my mom that morning and I was like, I slept so good last night. I slept for like 8 hours. And we ended up having to end our call. And she was like, oh, I'll call you back later. So I talked to her in the afternoon and she was like, well, you should sit down or lay down and take a nap if the baby's asleep. And I was like, I'm not even tired. I don't want to take a nap. I slept so good last night. So it's kind of crazy what like one good night of sleep feels like when you really are sleeping so poorly.
Yeah, any of them that you can get at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, if we could even get like, 50% of the time sleep like this, I would feel like a different person and it would definitely help prepare me more for labor and afterwards.
Yep. Yeah. Now that you're in the third trimester, between
Yeah.
the labor coming up and then being back in newborn territory again.
Yes. I'm not exactly looking forward to that. I am and I'm not. The newborn snuggles are the best.
Yeah.
Luckily, you're like blissfully delirious.
Yes. Yes.
I hear a baby. My daughter's standing outside the door yelling,
Oh.
Mommy.
Well, I just had one other thing I was going to ask you about.
Okay.
Right. Did you try bone broth?
Yes. Oh, I'm glad that you brought it up because I forgot about it. So I did. I ended up, because it wasn't like in our meal plan to have bones available, I ended up on, it was exactly a week ago. I went and bought soup bones. I simmered them or not simmered them. It's lower than a simmer, but whatever. Cooked them for like 24 hours with, some veggies and apple cider vinegar. And I was like so excited to try it because I thought it smelled really good. And then I tried it and I was like, this is awful. And I think my husband thought it was really funny because I thought it was so gross when I first tried it, but I hadn't salted it. So then I added salt to it and I was still like, oh, I don't know. So what I did, and I don't know if this is like totally taboo, but I don't know if you've seen the Better Than Bouillon base. It's like a paste. So I've been drinking it every day, like a cup of it, and I have been putting like an eighth of a teaspoon in it, like hardly any. And I think it's delicious when I put that in it. So I was like, okay. I mean, I want to keep experimenting with it. It was obviously my first shot. I also thought it tasted better when I added a little more apple cider vinegar than what like everywhere I was reading was saying to do. But when I did that, I really liked it. And so I'm trying to work on like adding it to our cooking more. But for actual labor, because I had thought about having it available in labor, I want to keep working on it and tweaking it because I want it to be something that I want to consume if I'm not wanting like any sort of real food, which I didn't last time. So I'd be surprised if I did this time.
Yeah, I think adding the Better Than Bouillon paste to it to enhance the flavor a little bit, if that's what you need to do, is fine. You're still going to get the benefits out of the bone broth.
Yeah, and
It's
I'm being really careful about how much, because I mean, not that I'm super careful about salt intake right now, because I really have read and seen and heard so much about how it's really healthy in pregnancy. But I still am being careful about not too much of just that. It's such a condensed sodium, and I'd rather be salting food and stuff. But yeah, I'm actually really enjoying it like that. So I've just been drinking like a mug of it every day.
good.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because
Yeah.
I was like so excited that I finally did it.
You'll have it perfected by labor.
Yay, that's my plan.
So the salt thing, yeah, you're probably getting a fraction of the salt that you were getting in your first pregnancy. This
That's
pregnancy,
true, actually.
since you're cooking.
That's true.
Yeah, because the biggest sources are prepared foods.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not doing fast food and you're buying higher quality restaurant foods, they still tend to put a lot of salty additive things in it.
Right.
So I'm sure you're getting, adding an eighth of a teaspoon of bouillon to your cup of bone broth is probably not even getting you close.
That is a good point.
Yeah. And if most of the salt that you're using on your foods is high quality, like Himalayan salt or trace mineral salt, of some sort other than the bouillon that you're putting in, then I wouldn't be worried about your sodium intake.
And it is typically, I mean, I'm someone that like would usually have sea salt available, but I read about it early on in my pregnancy. So I've been using a trace mineral salt from like the Mediterranean Ocean since I got pregnant and found out about that. So I do feel a lot better that there's a lot of good that it does for your body in pregnancy.
Yeah, there's a lot of good. And we definitely have to get salt.
Yeah.
And if you're not consuming a lot of processed foods and a lot of prepared foods,
right,
then it's really hard to oversalt when you cook everything from scratch.
Yeah, which we do.
Yeah,
pretty much everything.
Okay. Anything else that you have on your list today?
I think that's about it. So I'm going to keep working on my breathing and then just keep going through the course and really enjoying it. So I'm excited.
Good. Yeah, I think you're almost there. You have just a little bit of the fourth one left, and then 5. I would encourage you to watch 5, even though it's postpartum.
Yeah.
Before, just because there are some things in there about getting ready for going to, in your case, the birth center, that will probably be helpful. The newborn care and the breastfeeding stuff are not going to be as important for you to watch beforehand.
Right.
Since this is your second, and you can still watch them later.
Yeah.
But at least the first couple of module 5, I would recommend watching before. Some people put that off, but there's some stuff in there
I like to be prepared, so I'll probably watch it all. And I think even this stuff I know, it's good refreshers. You think it seems like, okay, it's only been 22 months since I brought a newborn home, but there's so much that I'm sure you forget. And like I said, you're in a blissful delirium for that first month anyway.
Yep, delirium and then amnesia.
Yeah.
Luckily, we're programmed to mostly remember the good parts of things.
Right.
So, yeah. Otherwise, number 2s would never come along.
Right. No, they probably wouldn't. So.
Okay. Well, good call. So you're going to work on your breath and continue the classes.
Yeah.
And keep trying out the potassium and perfecting your bone broth. And you're going to be all ready for this baby.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This has been so fun.
Yeah, it has. It's definitely been a lot of fun. Okay. I think that was all.
Yeah, cool.
I will let you get back to your little one.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah. Well, we will talk soon then.
Okay. Sounds good. Let me know if you need anything.
Thank you. I will. Bye.
Bye.
A baby.
Thank you so much for listening to this coaching session. If you would like to be considered for a coaching call on the Journey to Birth podcast, visit our website at naturalbirthcompass.com/podcast, fill out our questionnaire, including your contact info, and I will be in touch. Finally, if you want to show our amazing guest some love for being so vulnerable on this show and allowing us all to learn along with her, leave a comment for this podcast or share it with someone you love who will benefit as well. Need to reach me? Find me on the socials at Natural Birth Compass or visit the website naturalbirthcompass.com. See you next time on your Journey to Birth.